The purpose really to start is to share the feedback with you that we've received to date. So we've received feedback via the exit polls and survey. We've also received a lot of feedback through email. And then we want to spend the rest of the time after we share the data that we've collected to hear any additional feedback that we need to consider as we develop our new budget. And as you know, or may not, we have less than 48 hours to propose and adopt a budget, which will take place on Wednesday night. So my advice to you right now is, as we go through, Jeff Cimmerer, and our data team has just taken out all the raw data and put it into two different presentations, one the exit poll and one the survey. Feel free to write any questions down and use those questions for later. Anything that we present tonight will also be housed on our website. I'd like to welcome our Chief Information Officer, Jeff Cimmerer.
So good evening. As Dr. Cimmerer, I run the data team down the hallway. Very proud to stand in front of you to review the exit poll and the community survey that we put together in a very short timeline for your review. My job as Chief Information Officer is not to come to conclusions for the community or for the Board of Education. My job is to simply share what you're saying, because we're listening. I want to say straight up that I am trained in very scientific methods from the University of Rochester, and I will be the first to say that these are not scientific in nature. I liken them to community feedback loops or suggestion boxes. But we take the data very seriously, and we triangulate that data with many other sources to make decisions, ones like we're going to make here and in the future soon. So, with no further ado, to jump into the demographic data for our exit poll, I want to draw your eye to a few things as the slides progress or as you look at your handouts, and that is, of the possible 6,900 or so residents that voted, the response rate is going to be a little bit low. I'd say 1 in 4 took the time to take the exit poll. As you saw on that opening slide, that was a very busy day for us. We processed a lot of information and had more staff and more computers readily available than ever, but even still, it took time to get through voting this year. So, for example, question 1 had about 1,612 responses, which is about a 23% response rate when you look at it overall. I would urge the community, absolutely the Board of Education, to be cautious with that number. By no means, as I stated earlier, is that scientific in nature and should be used in isolation. So I'm going to gloss over some of the demographic slides. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I'll dig a little bit deeper as to what some of the other slides say if they look ambiguous, and then I look to the board and ultimately the board and the community to process that data. So one of the first questions that the traditional survey that we put out asked for the exit poll was, are you a parent of school-aged children? And you can see it's almost a 50-50 split for those who responded. If yes, where do those students go to school? Obviously, many going to our public school right here in Pittsford, 86%. For those who responded to the survey, that's 1,590 responses. You can see with the slide in front of you or in your handout how the different catchment areas were distributed. For our demographic data, we can see that there is almost a normal bell curve relative to age groupings as to how people responded again for this survey. And I'm going quickly through the demographic data to get some more to the salient points. Are you an employee of the school district? 90% who took this survey for the 1,513 responses said no, they were not an employee of the school district. For internal purposes and other reasons, we wanted to find out if folks volunteer for our schools while taking this exit poll. We wanted to garner that information, and 79% said no, while 21% said yes. 84% said they were not graduates, while 16% said they were. And that's based on 1,478 responses. Again, not leading you to any conclusions or even letting my own bias slip in, even though I'm not a resident, but I am an employee, I would just let you know that 78% reported they did not have pre-H school children who took this exit survey. 69% said no in regards to being a parent to a PCSD grad, while 31% said yes. We also asked a question around if the participants for this survey were a member of a PCSD sports or music booster club, and clearly we could see 85% said no, while 15% said yes. This is one of the slides I was referring to with a very small font, so I encourage you to look on. I know Mr. Pero already said that this is going to be on the website and other sources, but just to not read all this to you since the font is so small. 68% is the first number there that said that people, folks, community members who took this survey gather information from our district newsletter or from our mailings, while about 43% look on our website, and 37% rely on neighbors or other folks to gain their information for a budget vote, like the one we're going through now. This one specifically pointing to the May 16th vote. We asked the question, how do you feel about being well informed? And 83% said yes, based on 1,580 responses. This is why we talk about this not being scientific, and I talk to you straight up, and we're being very transparent with you. As we all know, the budget was unfortunately defeated on the 16th, whereas if we were to go strictly by this exit poll, we would have passed, and we would have passed by a supermajority. So I want you to be cognizant of that, because in central office, we are very cognizant of that. So in this case, it would have passed 63 to 38, but this is just one tool on the barometer in the tool chest of using data to make decisions. And as I promised central office, I would not read every one of these results and or questions and answers, but I'll guide your eye to the question and to the answer of the main reason why I voted yes, and it's towards the bottom of the page, because I agreed with the budget that was presented. And we have a little bit of a mixed bag for the remaining pre-slugged answers that were on the survey that we provided. Now you'll note that there are some comments that were made, so we did listen, and we wanted to, in the continued spirit of the comments box, or we're listening, we did gather, and the data team and I all read the comments and try to categorize them. We call it coding, to try to make meaning. We did not try to interpret the comments. We just tried to put them in buckets so that we can share them out with you. We really try to keep interpretation to a limit. As an example of what I'm talking about, for those 180 or so comments, we had about 130 community members said they voted yes because of full day K. No more or less. They did not really elaborate on it with paragraphs or long sentences. They just told us that they like full day K. While others said, about 18 or so, that they always support the budget. Whereas about 10 said they support existing programs. Now you might say, Jeff, that doesn't add up to 180 plus comments, and I agree with you. What we do not include here are a lot of the singletons or single comments or double or triples, folks writing many different things that we couldn't certainly tabulate on this, but I can assure you we do have the data behind the scenes to look at those single, double, and triple type responses. And according to 590 responses, the main reason why folks voted no. Now 590 responses is a very small number on 6,900 voters that took place on May 16th. I want to draw your attention to that and be cautious. But for those 590, the thing that jumped off the page for us as a data team was that the budget was too high at 44%, and that there were some other reasons why folks voted no for those who responded. And I'm going to show you what they said for the top three or so. As we categorized them, reading through all the comments, double checking our work, not any one person hopefully using a bias to read them. And we found about 85 found that straight up full day K was not beneficial. 67 said that they did not want to exceed the tax cap. And 24 in some way, shape, or form needed more information. When we compare the why I voted yes and why I voted no side by side, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. I promised at the beginning of my presentation that I would not do that for you, nor for the board. But here's where you see the top three as we wrote down and jotted those categories from the comments received in the exit poll. Reminding folks that there was about a 23% response rate overall, and for the written comments closer to maybe 5 to 10%. So low numbers, be cautious with that. So we asked a question, getting towards the middle to end of the exit poll, FDK influence, full day K influence. How much did the addition of full day K kindergarten influence your vote today? And for those 1,500 or so responses, 27% said none, 42% said some, and 31% entirely. And we do something behind the scenes called cross-tabulations. We cross-tabulate full day K and yes votes and no votes to try to discern for you so you can make some decisions as to why people are voting the way they're voting. So I'm just going to simply draw your eye to a few things. I'll let you make your own conclusions. But for the yes votes, 37% said it was entirely an influence. And for our no votes, based on 1,576 responses, 40% said none. Tax cap. How much did exceeding the tax cap influence your vote today? 37% said none, 37% said some, that looks a little off there, and the numbers are true at 26% entirely. That was for 1,576 responses. The data team did the same thing. We took those cross-tabulations and we tried to tease out why folks voted yes and no juxtaposed to the tax cap influence. More of the same, not leading you to any conclusion, but just simply stating that 55% said for the yes votes that it had no impact, and 65% for the no votes said it entirely had an influence for the vote. Major influences that were other than what was written there in the survey itself. Again, we went through and reread all the comments, cross-checked it with multiple sets of eyes to make sure we were reading it and all reading the same thing. For the 597 responses, the large categories fell in as such. We're going to do it for the kids. We're going to do it for our children. 188. 95 responses, not percent, but 95 responses said the taxes were too high. That was a major influence on how they voted on the 16th. 82 said in some way, shape, or form that full day K was positive. 74 wanted us to do some better planning. It was a request that they had. And 49 said in some way, shape, or form that they felt that there was a lack of transparency between us, the board, and you. Typical voter. Question number 19, as we asked on the exit survey. How do you typically vote for a school board, or school budget, excuse me? And 60% said they typically vote yes. And you can see the other results there for yourself. Now I'm going to draw your eye here. This is not percentages, but it's numbers, it's counts. So I know the previous slides were drawing heavily off of percentages. So we asked those if they had not voted in the past. 87 said that they were a new qualified voter, first time voting, and 201 said that they were new to Pittsford, for a total of about 288 responses, or it should be exact. Future tax cap override. How supportive would you be of a future tax cap override if it was needed to maintain current programs? And I want you to focus on maintain because we changed the wording a little bit on the next slide. And I would draw your eye to the center of that page. 37% said it would depend on specific programs, whereas 19% were mostly supportive and 28% fully supportive. This is adding new programs. So how supportive would you be of a future tax cap override if it was needed to add new programs? And again, we have a bubble in the middle. It would depend on the programs involved. And 15% supportive, 18% fully supportive, while 10% completely unsupportive. Getting to the end of the exit survey, for full day K support, did you support the implementation of full day kindergarten program for Pittsford Central School District? And 76% based on 1,546 responses said yes. Again, small font, so please use your handout if need be. But if you supported full day K, if so, why? And 51% said it's to have our students remain competitive. Now, we did allow open-ended questions and answers for that. There was a little bit of ebb and flow in the conversation in the comments and trends, but we tried to boil it down to the following. 126 said in some way, shape, or form that they were supportive. About 26 said they were supportive with no increase, while others thought that it was going to be some form of daycare for them, and then other answers repeating what we had already asked in the questions themselves. Full day K support. If not, tell us why. 57% said the program is not necessary in Pittsford, keeping in mind that 341 responses were here on a total voter pool of 6,900 plus candidates. From those 116 or so comments, for those that gave us a little bit of additional feedback, we teased out 43 that were against full day K, 40 that wanted us think about the tax cap override a little harder, and then 21 that were a top district without full day K. It's something that we should keep in mind. So as one single data point, not to be used as a sweeping statement, course of action, if today's proposed budget does not pass, which we know it did not, which course of action would you suggest that the Board of Education take? And 52%, reading from the ground up here, hold a second vote, at or below the tax cap with some kind of a reduction in program or services. And I know I've mentioned it multiple times, I'm hoping it's sinking in that that was based on 1,500 plus responses, not on the voter pool of 6,900 people. It's about 22% of the possible voters. As we wrap up with this part of the survey and the feedback loop and the part that we're really listening to what you have to say, we asked specifically if people would share if they had any ideas relative to programs and services that we should be thinking about cutting in order to get below the tax cap. And there was a large majority of folks that said that they weren't sure, about 110. 96 on the 410 responses said that full day K should be taken off the top, whereas others gave us feedback around athletics and sports, cutting administrators or administrative costs in central office, and benefits and salaries for all staff as a few of the top responses. We're always cautious about the general questions at the end, but we like to ask, do you have any final questions for us? Because sometimes, since we're human, we make mistakes, we're not perfect, but we do believe in collaboration. It's the hallmark of what we do as a school district. So we had a mixed bag of 320 responses, of which communication or folks needed more information, 68 responded in that way. Whereas 60 wanted us to manage the budget better, sometimes giving us some direct feedback. And 57 said yes to full day K. And I won't read the whole list, and you can see that on your handout and or on the screen, hopefully, in front of you. So now I'm going to turn and I want you to shift your mindset a little bit. So Thursday into Sunday nights, our communications department through Nancy Wayman's leadership constructed a community survey, which we typically put out and have been for years. This is not something that we just baked in the back room. This is something that we've been doing year after year in conjunction with various initiatives. I know it's been out in the community through social media and direct email to some of us that there was a concern about data contamination, which I take as Chief Information Officer very seriously and also with my doctor hat on. Following through on those requests to look into the data, I can tell you that there were 11 IP addresses that were used more than 5 times externally, which means to me what? It means that in some, 69 entries were generated from the same IP addresses, which equates to about 3% of what you're going to see in the next few minutes. Does that matter? It absolutely matters. Did we have time to look at exactly every one of those answers today? The answer is no, being that this data is only 16 to 18 hours old. So we will do that as a data team tomorrow or shortly after to make sure there wasn't any tampering for that 3%, but I want you to know that it was 3%. We also found a handful of machines in the district where internal IP addresses had machines take multiple surveys, and I would assure you that usually in a break room or a library or computer lab where paraprofessionals and other staff members usually use, but we are going to take that seriously as well and check into those to make sure that we're stacking of the deck, unquote. So being transparent and upfront, I want to tell you that we had that going on and we're reading through it, but at the same time we did have 2,168 people respond to that community survey Thursday through Sunday night. Sunday night, Nancy turned it off, and we started processing that data this morning. Once again, knowing that we're not going to make any sweeping judgments or statements or decisions just on a second data set. I consider it anecdotal data, but we also take it very seriously, knowing it's coming from quality staff members and residents. How is it distributed? Through district email. We have about 1,300 email accounts internally. We use district measures such as Infinite Campus Messenger for those who are signed up. Multiple emails could have went to the same home, but nevertheless we sent them out, trying to canvass as many folks as we could. As many of you know, we use social media such as Twitter and Facebook. Nancy advertised on the district website, and we went so far as to put out between 10 and 12 boxes to reach out to homes and or places where we thought people didn't have the internet. Senior living being an example, And we used those ballot boxes that were taped shut to collect paper ballots from those areas. We collected about 30 paper ballots from outlying areas, keeping everyone in the pool so that we can read that anecdotal data. So thank you for bearing with me so far. There's only a handful of slides in this survey, and then we'll turn it back over to Mike and the board. But glossing through some of the demographic data and some of the questions that are like the exit poll, we asked for those 2,168 responses, did they vote on the 16th, and 80% said yes. We asked once again, are they a parent, those responding to this 2,168 folks, if they were a parent of a school-aged child, 67% said yes. This probably looks familiar from the past survey from the exit poll on the 16th as to where those children go to school. 89% going to our public school here in Pittsford. We asked once again about catchment areas and where people were represented. No surprise, Mendon Center being the largest catchment area, since it is our largest catchment area. We once again gained the bell curve relative to age groupings. Once again, letting people know that that's 2,044 responses out of a possible pool of 25,000 voters, give or take. Once again, are we jumping to conclusions saying this is scientific and this is something that's going to inform the board tonight in isolation to make a move on? Hardly. It's just one more data point in our triangulation of data. Demographic data, a little bit more for you. We asked about organizations, and clearly PTSA jumped off the page as those helping to complete this community survey for the group. Similar to the exit poll, we asked about whether or not folks taking this community survey, if they were an employee or not. 90% saying no, they were not an employee of the school district. Nancy and the superintendent crafted some questions with central office around the revote, and we wanted to know what factor would most likely influence the support of a budget revote, and 42% talked about the override and the property tax, and whether it's necessary to include full day K. They said 42% said they would do it. For 1,955 responses. And you can read the remaining list there as to what factor they would connect with most. Very hard to see here. If you have your handout, I apologize for the 6-point font. But for the June 20th vote, that's the revote that's coming up. What course of action would you suggest that the Board of Education follow? And even if I could read it with my aging eyes, hold a second vote at or below the tax cap and thus requiring reduction of programs and services of some way, shape, or form. And there are obviously a couple of other results there as well. This is where we ended at 4:30 today. Obviously, this needs a little more processing, more reading. As I talked about with the exit poll, we had a half a dozen people reading the 993 responses in this case, making sure that bias was removed, making sure we were reading the same thing together. I'm not going to read this exhaustive list, but I've tried to, with the data team's help, which is about a half a dozen of us, to gather the pertinent themes for the Board of Education and for you, the community. 222 folks wrote about community supporting the full-day kindergarten program, whereas 130 wanted us to stay within the tax cap. Be mindful of that. 112 were against full-day K no matter what on those 993 responses. And just read a few more to you here, and you can read the rest. Folks needed a little more communication. They felt the need for more transparency in relation to details. I just gave an example. Please don't take that as the only thing that those 93 responses wrote, but as an example just to kind of clarify what we meant. They wanted more information about tax increases per $1,000. What would that look like on a home in Pittsford rather than just generalizing at $250,000? And I'll read one more before I turn it over to the superintendent. Support full-day K as long as full-day K was within the cap. So those were your top 5 from the open-ended questions. I would be quick to say that we need to read them more and pare this down, but that's about as far as we got after a day worth of processing all the thoughtful feedback. So I want to thank you for those that completed both of those surveys, or at least one of them. Appreciated the feedback. So with that, Mike, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
I will be relatively brief, and then we're going to transition to the public comment period. Tonight's a hard night, obviously. It's hard when things don't go a certain way, and I have to believe that there's an opportunity somewhere here. As we looked at Jeff's data, and I looked at Jeff's data again today with all of you, you can see a lot of conflicting things. You can see people in support of one thing and not in support of the other. And that means that there's disagreements, which means that there's disagreements in this room, and there may be disagreements even on the board. I think it's really important that when we have disagreements, that we're able to relay how we feel in a way that's helpful, because we really need your help tonight. We need to know what you're thinking, and we need to know why you're thinking that way, and we need to know what your recommendation would be moving forward. We do not have a budget adoption plan, and so tonight is a big part of our decision making. I just want to review a few dates, and you have some, but there's also an additional topic I want to share. On Monday, which is today, obviously, we'll begin the conversation around the budget. On the 24th, which is less than 48 hours, we have to have a budget adoption. On June 5th is a typical board meeting. A lot of the feedback that we got through email was around debt service, and people had a lot of questions about debt service and understanding debt service. And so on Monday, June 5th, as part of our board meeting, we'll actually have a presentation just on debt service, and then have a Q&A period, so that everyone can leave there feeling comfortable and knowledgeable about what debt service means. On Monday, June 12th is our public budget hearing, and then June 20th is our vote. Last year, we came off a tax cap levy of 0.58%. In order to get there, we had $1.5 million about in reductions. This year, we've had to get to 4.7, about $3 million in reductions that we made from the time we started. So we've made about $4.5 million in reductions over the last two school years. Some of the areas where the reductions have been made have happened because of enrollment and sectioning. So there were 7 teachers there. We've taken money from travel and conference, from athletics, clerks, paraprofessionals, technology, health insurance concessions, and looking at trend data across all budget codes to make sure that there absolutely is not an area that has more needed funding than it currently has. So our budget codes are really tight, and I gave you a sampling of some of the areas where we have made reductions. Our options moving forward is to present the same budget as last time, is to present a different budget, either within the tax cap or above the tax cap or below the tax cap. And last is to go strictly to a contingent budget, and that's the law. If this next vote, if we don't go to contingent, which I don't want to speak on behalf of the board, but we're here tonight probably because we want to try to work out what's best for kids in the community. If we did go to a contingent budget based off of the last budget, we would need to find approximately $6 million in additional reductions. When we started the process, we started with the budget process back in January. We started with our budget guidelines, and our goal this year was to develop a student-based budget, and you can read the bullets. We wanted our kids to have a real positive experience in the classroom. We also wanted to be able to hire and retain the highest quality staff. We also felt it was really important to maintain a high-quality professional development that would focus on keeping students engaged, providing authentic opportunities for students. We also wanted to make sure that we continued with social emotional learning, and it becomes interesting at this point because we have two things that are really important, and then we look at the third bullet, which is how do you do these two things and at the same time manage the impact of the investment education with sensitivity to limited community resources. So we've been seeking new sources of revenue, and we continue to do it, and we have hopefully some ideas to do it better in the future. Some examples are like our school foundation with KEEP, which has provided many opportunities for our kids the last couple of years. We continue to seek efficiencies to address unfunded mandates. I don't think we should lose sight of that. We're asked to do more, and we're asked to pay for it. And then, last but not least, is to provide the fiscal stability into the future, and doing that through keeping sustainable reserve accounts, protecting and maintaining the best bond rating possible, protecting the community's investment in facilities, and working with our legislators for appropriate levels of funding, which I can tell you, regardless of the direction we go today, will be certainly something that we would welcome full-blown support on. And then obviously, lastly, meeting legal mandates and contractual obligations. So to date, you heard Jeff talk about the different places we've heard information from. At the end of the meeting tonight, during my report, so it's going to be right at the end, I will begin having dialogue with the Board of Education relative to synthesizing all the information. Again, we have a real short window of time, and so we're going to listen, and then we're going to go through a regular board meeting, and then during the superintendent's report, we'll begin conversations about our next steps. I want to conclude by saying thank you for being involved, thank you for caring, thank you for voting, and thank you in advance for truly making suggestions that come from what you feel is best for kids. Thank you, everyone.